እሺ የሚቀጥለውን ፓነል አሁን እንጀምራለን። መጀመሪያ ሞዴሬተሮችን አስተዋውቅና ከዛ በኋላ ወደዛ እንቀጥላለን። For those of you that have just joined us, you have unfortunately missed a very informative session on digital transformation. We had very excellent speakers on the topic. And now we talked about many of the challenges that arise when it comes to digital transformation, financial bottlenecks, training bottlenecks, the issue of youth and their access to finances, the issue of decentralizing networks and the role of Ethiopian Telecom in making more enabling services, and the importance of training. ስለዚህ በቀድሞ ፓነል እንደሰማነው ብዙ ቻሌንጆች አሉን። በፋይናንስ ደረጃ በተለይ ወጣቶች እንዴት ነው ፋይናንስ አክሰስ ማድረግ የሚችሉት? በትሬኒንግ ደረጃ ብዙ ትሬኒንግ ይጎለናል፣ ከልጅነት ጀምሮ መጀመር አለብን ከሚለው የዳታና ሴኩሪቲ ኢሹም ተነስቷል። እንዴት አድርገን ነው ኔትወርኮቻችን የምናስፋፋው የሚለው ነገር ብዙ ነገር ተነስቷል። በዲጂታል ትራንስፎርሜሽን ስለ ፎሬን ኤክስቼንጅም ተነስቷል። ብዙ አገራዊ ጥያቄዎች አንስተን ነበረ። አሁን የምንሄደው ደግሞ ወደ ከዲጂታል ትራንስፎርሜሽን ወደ ዲጂታል ገቨርነንስ ነው። በዚህኛው በዲጂታል ገቨርነንስ ሞዴሬት የሚያደርግልን ሰለሞን ካሳ ነው። ሰለሞን ካሳ እንደምታውቁት የኢቢኤስ ቴክ ቶክ ዊዝ ሰለሞን የሚባለው ፕሮግራም ሆስት ነው። ከዛም ባሻገር በአሜሪካ ውስጥ የሚገኝ የፎርቹን 500 የዓለም አቀፍ ኩባንያ ውስጥም የቴክኖሎጂ ኮንሰልቲንግ እና ስትራቴጂ ማኔጀር ነው። እንዲሁም ባለፈው አመት የተመረቀው መጽሐፍ ሁላችሁም ገዝታችሁታል ብዬ ተስፋ አደርጋለሁ። ያልገዛው ካለ ያው ግዙት። ያለፈው አመት የተመረቀ መጽሐፍ አለው ግርምተ ሳይቴክ የሚባል የሳይንስን ታሪክ The History of Science በአማርኛ የተጻፈ የመጀመሪያው አይነት መጽሐፍ ነው። I'll introduce you to our moderator now. Are we ready for all of us to be focused on this next topic on digital governance? Our host is our moderator. Well, he's a host, so I called him a host. He's a host of EBS Tech Talk with Solomon, but he's also a technology consulting and strategy manager at a Fortune 500 global firm that is based in the US. He also recently wrote a book called Grimta SciTech, which is the wonders of SciTech in Amharic, a book about the history of science and technology, which is something of a very broad overview that I think it was the first of its kind when in writing a book about the history of science in Amharic. So he's going to be our moderator on the topic of governance. He will go ahead and introduce our panelists. And then after that, we will continue. This one is going to be in English, so we hope that those of us that are not less fluent in English will be patient the same way those that were not fluent in Amharic were patient on the first panel. So please help me in welcoming Solomon to the stage.
እንዴት አደራችሁ? ግቢያ ሰላምታው በአማርኛ ይሁንና በእንግሊዝኛ እንቀጥላለን። ያው እዚህ እንግሊዝኛ ብቻ የሚናገሩ የውጭ ሀገር ዜጎች ስላሉ ነው በእንግሊዝኛ ማድረግ ነው፣ ለሌላ ምክንያት አይደለም። ያው የነሱ ልምድ አስፈላጊ ስለሆነ እነሱ እዚህ መድረክ ላይ መምጣት ስላለባቸው እንግሊዝኛ አድርገናል። እንግዲህ ለዛ ነው። So ዛሬ የምንነጋገረው ስለ digital governance ነው. So what is digital governance? So let me just give you a little highlight about that, and then I'm going to do some introduction, and we're going to continue. So digital governance or e-governance is the use of ICT for delivering government service, exchange information, execute transactions, and integrate various standalone systems through which government's digital presence establishes transparency, accountability, effective service provision, and fast decision-making process. The delivery mechanism includes, as you know, websites and mobile apps and platforms and centers and any other internet or web-based tools and products to facilitate service between government to government. There are different kind of services, so I want you to pay attention on this one. So the first one is called G2G. Second one is government to citizens, G2C. Government to business, G2B. Government to employees, G2E. Government to internal organizations, G2O. Government to educational institutions, we call it G2EI. Digital governance, if implemented effectively, can play a critical role in supporting ongoing socio-political and economic reform in Ethiopia. In December 2018, the Prime Minister's administration unveiled a new initiative to improve and ease of doing business in the country, which is an exciting development for private sector both in and outside of Ethiopia. Establishing a strong governance powered by digital transformation is a key for Ethiopia's future success. This panel hopes to raise that awareness on the need of adopting e-governance, discuss the challenge and opportunities, and stimulate an ongoing dialogue until its potential is realized to promote citizens' well-being, create jobs, transform the economy, and foster attractive business opportunities. With that, I'm going to introduce my panelists, and then we're going to start right into it. So His Excellency Mr. Sisai Tola, State Minister from Ministry of Innovation and Technology. Next to him is Her Excellency Dr. Elise Kanza, Head of Africa for World Economic Forum. And next one is Mr. Oliver Chinagaya. Did I get it right? Chinganya, okay, Director for Africa Center of Statistics at the ECA, Economic Commission for Africa under UN. And Mr. Mike Singh, Founder and CEO of TC Group, a US-based company. And last but not least, Mr. Yodahe Zemikael, Principal Technical Advisor at the Prime Minister's Office. So each of you will have 3 minutes, especially the opening kind of question, because I'm going to start by thought-provoking kind of question, and then we'll see as we go, because I want to give as many opportunity as possible for the panel. So let's just be conscious with time, being concise. So let me just be very blunt on this one, because this is a very tricky topic. So building a digital governance is extremely complicated task. Let's just be honest with that and then start the conversation with that mindset. It's not only in Africa, but even in a more advanced nation, digital governance and implementing it is not an easy task. So some even argue that there is no point in talking about innovation and digitization in Africa and in Ethiopia as well. And that speaking about a digital governance in a place where many people have no power or connectivity makes no sense. That's an argument by a certain group of people. So my question to you, experts, is that how do we reconcile that conflicting fact, the fact that the reality on the ground is different, but we're trying to be digital as a government, as a nation? How is that possible? How are we going to do that with this lack of infrastructure and then many basic needs? So how can we do that? So from a national perspective, from government, I'm going to start with Mr. Sisai, and then I'll give you each of you 3 minutes for this one.
Okay, thank you very much to have this opportunity. First of all, just I want to add some few things on the explanation given by Dr. Solomon about digital governance and digital government. I think digital government or digital governance is the very important thing that is missing in discussion and understanding is the context. Digital governance is about transformation, transforming the government, the way it provides. Technology is one component. In that process, the very important thing is how the government is, first of all, deciding to transform itself from different perspectives. That is from the leadership point of view, from the human point of view, from the process, from the structure point of view. Then just to use the technology to achieve that transformation agenda. When we come to how we can achieve digital governance with all these problems, infrastructure and other problems, the first thing has to be the digital agenda has to be recognized by the government. The government is the one who creating the infrastructure, the government the one who is developing the human capital, But the government has to have a vision first. Has to have a vision just to transform, has to have a vision to deliver service to its citizen in effective, efficient, and convenient way. Once this commitment comes through planning and by allocating appropriate resources. So when just to come to the Ethiopian context, the Ethiopian government is already put the digital agenda first. We have especially the ICT policy. Also we have the e-government strategy just to provide service to the public. It's also, there are a lot of initiatives that's going on just to change the barriers, including the infrastructure. As far as the infrastructure is concerned, the government invested a lot on this area, especially on the mobile technology, also in the national and the international infrastructure, including the fiber optics networks. But according to our evaluation, Ethiopia is not digital ready because the existing infrastructure only provide basic communication services. But now we are talking about the digital economy. This infrastructure is not in the position to address current pushy requirements from the government and the public. But we also doing to change these things. The minister, His Excellency Dr. Getaun, mentioned yesterday, we already have a very aggressive plan to change the infrastructure issues for once and all. This is a very important initiative. I want to also repeat it on this panel discussion to bring all the partners on board. High broadband connectivity up to waradas and kabales, at least to reach waradas in 1 gig each warada, and each kabale up to 100 meg. So this is very important initiative, but it's not easy. So I agree what Ato Solomon said, but we are in the right track just to change the situation. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Building on the comments that have been made, first of all, allow me to briefly introduce the World Economic Forum so you understand where I'm coming from. It's an international organization for public-private cooperation. We work with different stakeholder groups, so both from the public and private sector, together to solve complex issues, such as the issue that has been raised about connectivity, why it matters, should it matter. And from a global perspective, about 2 or 3 years ago, there was an evaluation done to check the level of digital readiness globally, and it was found that there were about 4 billion people who were unconnected in any way to the digital economy. It's a big concern because the world is increasingly digital. The largest companies globally, some with GDPs or revenues that rival the continent, are tech companies. And so they're transforming the way we work, the kind of role it can play, whether it's mobile health, mobile money, really enabling citizens to live better. And so in this regard, our belief and our communities is that we need to make sure that everyone has access. The challenge that His Excellency has raised is, what does that mean to have connectivity? And you may have it, you can afford it, but you don't know how to use it. Or you may have all three, but the content is irrelevant to you, so why should you use it? So we found that it's actually a complex issue to also connect and bring about connectivity. And the last part that I'd like to share in my opening remarks is a growing concern which the forum highlighted through a report that was published at the end of last year on digital trust. So what we're seeing increasingly is that as there's been an erosion of trust in institutions, this is globally, and particularly governance and government institutions and the politicians, people trust less systems that are operated by governance institutions. Only about 45% of people in the world believe the digital economy will be beneficial to everyone in society. 43% believe that technology has made society more unequal. And 55% feel that not enough is being done to ensure that technology benefits anyone. And in this regard, it's also disheartening as an African and with responsibility for Africa that a 2018 UN report on e-governance showed that Africa is lagging far behind the rest of the world. So we have an immense challenge ahead of us, but we have to address it. Thank you.
Thank you, moderator. I think, first of all, what we need to be acknowledged really is to say that digital development has come to stay. And as governments, actually, they have no opportunity to skip this, but to be part of it. But for Africa, unfortunately, we are amongst, if you look at the global level in terms of number of countries that are least connected, 25 of them are globally, one of those are in Africa. And that's a big challenge for us, that we're not able to be connected to this new destruction, if you want to say. But what are we doing at the Center of Excellence at the ECA? This is the Economic Commission for Africa. As part of addressing this divide that the moderator did allude to, and also His Excellency, is that we're trying to come up with means and mechanism of harmonizing these processes in countries. One of the things that we've noticed that in the countries, there's different solutions that are being provided by different vendors for short terms, and these are unharmonized, are segmented, and don't speak to each other. Also trying to develop principles, at least minimal principles that countries can anchor on, so that they're able to develop, regulatory frameworks around those principles that will be able to allow the necessary infrastructure to be put in the countries. So in terms of what we need to do to bridge the gap, and in particular, how that is a process that requires to bring in the private sector, because they are key. They have the resources. They are the maybe the highest beneficiary of the digital economy, if we were to put it that way. And also, the ones that drive the engine of the economy, because they'll basically provide the resources that are legal framework as well as the regulatory framework that allows for an environment to have a digital platform that informs everyone that is supposed to be part of it. So these are, I think, some of the issues that are required. But of course, to make that possible, there's also an issue that to look at the people themselves and the processes. Do we have the right skills? Because in most of these places, we're talking about we need to digitize, but do we have the right skills? So again, the government has a responsibility to ensure that people are trained or incapacitated with the necessary skills to be able to, part of the process, the issue of inclusivity becomes paramount. But if we don't do that, that means there will be segments of the society that will not be able to access the digital economy or indeed the digital development in countries.
When it comes to infrastructure, we know that it's not Africa's best suit. We know our infrastructure is not strong. When we look at sectors like agriculture, they need big infrastructure. Industry, manufacturing, they need big infrastructure. But when we come to the service sector is one sector that the ICT can capitalize on. All I need to get for a transaction to happen between me and Solomon is connectivity and power. That power does not need to come from the grid. That connectivity does not need to come from the state telecom. All I need to do to transact with someone else is just connectivity and power. That does not have to be centralized. So this is one of the parts of ICT or tech in the service sector. And I believe Africa should capitalize on that. When we talk about infrastructure, it's not centralized infrastructure. There are pastoralists in Nigeria that use their mobile phones to buy small solar boxes. They charge their phones with it and also pay their payments through that. They are completely off-grid, so it's possible to have a strong service sector, a very efficient service sector without the best infrastructure. That's one thing. And That's what the government, Ministry of Innovation and Prime Minister's Office, that's the policy we're following with recent policy changes in the tech sector.
Thank you. Salam to everyone. First and foremost, I wish to extend my sincere thanks to the administration of President Abiy Ahmed and to Minister. You're an adopted son of Miami, my home city. I must apologize to the people of Ethiopia for taking so long in my life to come to this great country. I read of your history. I was with Band Aid when they recorded Do They Know It's Christmas in 1984. I was much younger then. And I always wanted to come here because I'd read about the great African Rift Valley, read about Sheba. So finally I'm here, and I apologize. It took me almost all my life to come to this ancient and beautiful country, which I always see as Abyssinia, with Djibouti, Somalia. To me, you all look the same. I couldn't tell the difference. When I eat your food, I see a lot of Indian influence, and I know for 1,000 years you've been trading with India. Many people say you're an Indian. Well, I'm of Indian descent, but I'm a Latin American. I was born and raised in Guyana, in South America. I'm not the first Latin American to come to Africa. Many of you will remember Che Guevara came from Argentina and Cuba to bring freedom to the Congo with Patrice Lumumba. Many of you will remember Cuba and my homeland of Guyana. We sent soldiers to fight in Angola, Mozambique, and Namibia to bring freedom. So, and also you must read Walter Rodney. He was born in Guyana. He wrote the book, How Europe Underdeveloped Africa.
Mr. Singh, I'm going to,
Yes.
in favor of time, let's just get to the point.
Yeah, I must say Ethiopia is very lucky. You have a youthful prime minister who, in my opinion, seems to lead, follow, or get out of the way. He wants to get things done, and that's great. I see a lot of young people here I'm comforted by. But in terms of how do you get to this, transforming Ethiopia to the digital utopia, there are 4 things. You need to have resilient infrastructure. If you don't have resilient infrastructure in terms of bandwidth and broadband access, then the young people who you need to teach to create the human capital pool will not be able to reach their fullest potential. Then you must anchor that with a predictable business environment, resilient infrastructure. You have a trained and skilled human capital pool. You have a predictable business environment and the rule of law, such as an FCC model. Everything else will fall into place. Once you have the pillars of good governance, money will come. You're not sitting far from Qatar and the UAE. And between the two, I think they've got almost $3 trillion ready to invest in this continent.
Thank you. Thank you. Dr. Ganza, you brought up a very good point. I'm going to interject that right here, the affordability issue, right? So I was studying some statistics Africa-wide, how internet is affordable. Actually, it's one of the most expensive continent in the world. So I think the consensus is for your internet cost, monthly cost, to be 2% of your lowest income threshold. That's the consensus globally. You know what Africa's is? 8.5% of the lowest income threshold. And Ethiopia is kind of almost the same. So telecom, I know telecom did a big cut a few months ago. I don't know how you guys are really having the infrastructure. If it's not followed up by affordability, there's no point. And also, His Excellency Ato Sisai mentioned a critical thing here. Last mile, we call it last mile to the rural areas. If we don't establish that, there's no point in digital governance. Because you know why? 80% of Ethiopia population, you know where they live? Where do they live? Rural areas. Only 20 million people are living in cities like Addis Ababa, Redwan, and the likes. So when we say digital governance, we're talking about 100 million people. Now we're not talking about Addis Ababa, we're not talking about Awasa. So if, leading digitally, if you're not accounting those 80 million people, there's no point in this conversation. We can just stop it right now because we are talking about 80 million people being left out. So let's have that framework when we talk about that. And the next question is, how should that national roadmap and strategy should look like And maybe Dr. Kanza, you might share your experience from similar economies and benchmarking in Ato Sisai. Also, I'm sure you're working with partners and international exposure. I know Estonia is a great success story. One of the individuals was supposed to be from Estonia. How many people know Estonia? Estonia is a very tiny country, under 2 million people. I would imagine they were under the Russians, and then they, after they became independent, everything. How many? Oh, okay. So now they are the top country in the whole world for digital governance. 99.9% is e-service, and I'm sure the government is taking some experience from there. But so my question is, how should the national strategy and roadmap should look like for digital governance, and what is the best experience we can learn from similar economies? I'll start with Dr. Kanza and then Ato Sisai, and maybe I'll ask a few of you.
Thank you. I'll start off with an example that illustrates how difficult it is. So I don't want us to underestimate. It's an aspiration we have. At the same time, it's not a light exercise. And it really needs, as was pointed out earlier, all of us to work together. In 2016, we launched an initiative along the lines of what I shared earlier, Leaving No One Behind, called Internet for All. And the aspiration under Internet for All in Rwanda was to connect 5 million people by 2020. We're not there yet, and 2020 is around the corner. Having said that, what they established in the process was a national framework, a task force that brought together stakeholders from the public and the private sector, including not just business and government, but also civil society, entrepreneurs, academia, because you actually need a whole different host of players to bridge the gap, particularly the rural gap as well as the poverty gap. Through these mechanisms, they established regular working groups and accountability that is directly overseen by the minister, but the president is very much in around that. Building on that, they integrated it into the national strategic program for digital. So it's not just a project, but it was mainstreamed into their operations, because digital cuts across everything. The second example, building on Rwanda, South Africa, where we launched Internet for All South Africa in 2017. They also had ambitious targets of connecting the 22 million unconnected South Africans. By the end of this year, we're not there. But we are making traction and have learned quite a few lessons about what it takes. And the key one that I will mention, in addition, is great, but it's a space that is occupied by big business and governments. It's very expensive. But there's a lot of progress that can be made in terms of skilling and in terms of solutions if we're able to improve the environment for SMEs and to empower young people to drive the agenda.
Affordability issue, basically in the context of Ethiopia, is not only the affordability, it saw the outreach also limited, because Ethiopia is a very big country with 100 million people. Our Kabbales, around 16,000 Kabbales, are not getting internet in any ways. Most of our schools are not connected. In our case, one is the outreach, the connectivity issue. The other one is having the connectivity is one thing. It also has to be very affordable. So to solve this problem, the government is taking different initiatives. One is just to create a competitive environment, more private sector to come and invest in this sector. As you all know, the government's already decided to privatize partially the telecommunication sector. Now the government's already finalized to come and operate, because when the competition there is a possibility just to improve the connectivity as well as the price. The price always comes, one way of bringing the price down is through competition. This is one big hope. The second one is, still even if we have a competitive environment, there are areas that still need the government's attention. With the current price, with the current telecom price, it's very difficult to connect schools and health centers. It's only 10% of the health centers are getting internet, even the minimum bandwidth. Some of them are part of the world, even 1 gig internet connectivity is becoming a consumption of a single household. So to change this, government has to take the responsibility, make the internet connection to reach to each and every individuals, as well as to be affordable. From our study, this can be done only if we follow some innovative approach. When we do some investigation on some research on our new initiative, different companies from the private sector come up without adding too much investment on the existing infrastructure. They can reduce the price by 10 and 20 folds. So what we are doing now, having a private partners from local and abroad to design based on our requirement, just to reduce the price and make it available to all parts of the country. So the government initiative is always very important to reach the unreached parts of the society.
Okay, thank you. Let me do the next question. I'll give you a chance, okay? Oliver, do you have something to add? Okay, make it short. And
I'll be very short.
The next one.
Very short. And the reason I'm insisting on it is because we, as part of what we do at ECA, is assisting countries to develop strategies. And one of the things that we are under in the center is how do we help countries. So I think in my view, a good governance strategy on digital development should really be have what I would call an accountability framework, and it should be around the issues of objective, the statements, if you like, the strategies themselves that needs to be undertaken in terms of where you want to take going forward. But with all that, it means that you need to come up with certain objectives or goals, if you like, and those goals to me they surround around 4 things. One is on the process, or first maybe let me talk about the people. Who are you targeting? The minister just talked about reaching out to the people that are out there. How are we going to reach these people? The second part is the process. What process are we going to engage to make sure that we reach to these people? And the third component is the technology itself. What kind of technology can we use, at least to leapfrog, in perhaps maybe using some baby steps to be able to arrive at where we want? And finally, it's the resources that are required, because that's why, again, why the minister is talking about that, government putting up all the necessary resources to put together and mobilize to ensure that the strategy is actually not just developed, but implemented. We have a problem on the continent that we have all sorts of strategies that are being developed. The problem that we have is implementation. Okay. Very nice strategies, but implementation is the problem.
Awesome. That actually leads me to the next question, which is I want to emphasize and re-emphasize how hard to do these things is. Just government by itself is extremely complex because it interacts with a lot of nuances, right? Social, political, economic, people, organization, culture, and global system as well. So it's completely cumbersome process of governing, right? And then on top of that, add technology. Technology itself is a complex thing. You see the shiny website after it's done, oh wow, yeah, I can click things and I can submit form and then process done. But what goes in the background from inception to implementation is completely a nightmare. I'm in it, I know it. So at the same time, so that's the fact. So these two complex things now, we're trying to marry up two complex things into one. That's what we're trying to do. So let me give you some statistics, and then I'm going to ask Yoda and then a couple of people, right? 30% of projects around digital governance around the world, including the most sophisticated countries, is a total failure. 30%. 50 to 60% of it is like partial success. And only 20% is a success story around the world in digital governance implementation. So this is just the reality on the ground. And Ethiopia is not exception, right? So how are we going to do this thing differently for this not to happen, not to fall into the 30%, maybe not to fall into the 50 to 60%, and be the lucky ones to be in the 20%. Okay, let's forget the 20%. How can we partially be successful in and be one of the 50 to 60% of the nations? Yoda.
I believe to add up on the previous comments about driving costs down. How can we make things cheaper? Of course, competition is the number one thing we can consider in this area, especially if there is another telecom. Prices go down naturally. One interesting factor to consider in this is, of course, rural connectivity, where the telecoms don't make as much profit. For example, if you compare rural connectivity, our monopoly, our single Ethio Telecom, and their inefficiency, but we have to give some credit where it's due. A friend of mine, a couple of weeks ago, sent me a screenshot. He was standing on the side of Lake Turkana, southwestern Ethiopia, in the southern Omo region. He can get 3G. Of course, if it was Safaricom, they wouldn't do this. This is obvious. It's because of the policy towards uniform and unbiased connectivity that we have reached to this level. That being said, of course, we need competition, we need liberalization. That's how MNOs have now become the VCs, right? Like Safaricom is the VC of M-Pesa, M-Pesa. So to drive down, we would need competition, but at the same time, we need very strong regulation, very strong policy making. That being said, a good government is always a lean government. If I want to sell my house, if I have to 5 different offices, that's not good governance. But if I only have to make 5 clicks, I sell it, that's good governance. So even though government is complex, technology should make it less complex.
Okay, sure. I'm going to give you a chance, Mr. Singh, quickly, and then just let me rephrase. Good point, Yoda. Let me rephrase the question, right? So the grand scheme of things, digital governance, yeah, those are key points. But the reason for the failure that I just mentioned is due to budget overrun. It's a very expensive project to do, and missing timing and timelines, and running out of scope and out of vision, right? So maybe can you talk around baby steps and kind of limiting scopes and setting a realistic goal to achieve some things, like there's pilot income, maybe pilot some best case governing ideas, and then scale up. Just I want to talk around. I'm going to give Dr. Atosisa, I think.
Thank you, sir. I agree with what you said about improving connectivity and infrastructure, but making it easy, having a strong regulator, UBA funding. Look at India, digital India, 200,000 villages today have fiber, connecting them right across India. And today in India, for $5 American, you can get 30 gigabytes of data, unlimited text and voice. You don't even get this in the developed world. $5 American or less, 30 gigabytes of data, unlimited talk and text on a 4G network. And you can Google it, GIO. Digital India is a good, what India did, they spent money, but they spent it in the right places. And they had the right talent. So once you have the right talent, persons that are well-trained, that are practitioners, who you can't sit in an office and do this. You gotta hit the ground. You gotta get into the rural areas. I just know like Gondar, Tigray, I don't know some of these villages, but I think this can be done. And you have many bright young people just listening to you. You're the kind of talent the FCC can use. And you need to have a very strong regulator. And you need to have a minister, such as Minister Getahoon, and a team, I see Ahmed in here, that are going to remain laser focused. This is our objective. This cannot be an open case. We're going to get there till kingdom come. Thank you. But we have to get there. That is the objective. These are the timelines. And people need to be held accountable. If you hire someone and they're slacking off, shape up or shape out. That's just my word. Might sound harsh, but the bottom line is delivery. I always believe the proof is in the pudding.
So 2 examples. One that illustrates that tech is a means to an end and not an end. The Kenyan government, in collaboration with IBM, worked on adopting blockchain in the supply chain as a means to improving their competitiveness. It took them 2 years. A big part of it was actually dealing with people and the processes. It was not technology. So that's one key thing that governments can focus on in terms of getting things right. The second is with respect to creating safe spaces where the private sector can innovate and test new products and solutions without having to undertake the normal bureaucracy and regulatory frameworks and policies, but they're testing. So why are they being subjected to rigid systems? In this regard, and some use the term regulatory sandboxes for that, so creating fixed safe spaces. Fintech is probably the most advanced in that regard in Africa, but there are only 3 countries that have sandboxes: Kenya, South Africa, and Sierra Leone. That's it. How can we get more of the remaining 51 countries on board to create these spaces where both the policymakers can learn alongside the entrepreneurs with a view to setting up national frameworks that can benefit everyone?
Okay, thank you. I think the question is how this digital transformation can be succeeded, because there are a lot of experience from different parts of the world. Some succeeded, maybe some failed. So for us, like Ethiopia, who's envisioning from others, because there are a lot of countries who are successful now, fully benefiting their citizens from the digital transformation. I met 2 weeks ago one gentleman from Estonia. He's a digital ambassador of Estonia. Even they have digital ambassadors. The mission of this ambassador is to sell digital experience of Estonia to different countries. So what he mentioned to us, 99% of services are online in Estonia. There is only 1% that is because of their law. You are not allowed just to give that service online. Maybe my friends remember that maybe it's wedding and yeah. So this is a big thing. So we can learn a lot from them. So not to do mistake again and again. Just the one and the very important thing is just to learn from others. The first and the very important thing is just to have a clear vision and leadership. That's very important. We don't believe the investment we made and the result we achieved in the context of Ethiopia is not matching. Maybe it's the same also with other countries. So it's not because of the investment, it's not because of the money. The government is investing a sustainable, reasonable amount on the ICT sector. But what we achieved so far still is not right. Maybe the one reason is the leadership. So we have to have a clear vision and leadership to succeed. The third things, I also want to compare this with other countries. In case of Ethiopia, still we are not good. We don't have a good partnership with the private sector. So we have to, the government has to focus on creating a conducive environment just to facilitate the ecosystem. Once the ecosystem is there, once the conducive environment is there, the private sector can move this transformation in a very, very fast way. So what does it mean when we say creating a conducive environment? The first and very important is to have appropriate regulations and standards in place. So what we are working now, at least the e-transaction law, we believe it can create a lot of things, the private sector to play its role. We also, in the final stage of submitting the national enterprise architecture and interoperability standard, this can also help different organizations to develop a system that can interoperable. It's also just to keep the quality, the standard. On the creation of the ecosystem is the capacity building. Make ready the digital skill. It's at the end of the day, it's up to the government. Of course, the private sector can play a role, but the government has to have a lead, to have them to in some environment to get the read skill. The third one is the infrastructure. As we already said these things many times, the infrastructure is very important. This cannot be addressed only by the private sector. It's like a road. The government has to find the gaps and feel that by doing this, we can increase the success rate of our digital transformation agenda.
Thank you. Oliver, unless you have something, we can go to the next. Do you have? You sure? Okay, I just want to give you an opportunity. Okay, she's the one keeps me in check. Good time? All right.
Yeah. Just one more example, and because I spot my Ethiopian sister, Rote Abdella, in the audience, and as you open up to comments, Microsoft has done an incredible job of introducing policy labs, those centers, South Africa, in Kenya, and in Nigeria. Our policymakers also need support in terms of rethinking policy making in this tech environment, but she knows more, and I hope she'll say a few words.
Absolutely, it's all about ecosystem. I'm sure Amrote is going to say a few things, because without all those pieces together, there is no success. Do you have something to add? Quick.
So we kept mentioning Estonia a couple of times, and I just wanted to add one of their biggest successes in making all their services electronic was they have a very strong identity platform, identity scheme.
That's going to be my next question. So I'm going to ask you that question, and you're going to explain really well. So hold the thought for a second. Okay. One quick fact about Estonia, by the way. They have this service called e-citizenship. Any of you right here, right now, can be an Estonian citizen, but electronically, just a virtual citizen. So that you can have business, you can open business, you can have accounts, banking system, services, and everything. So there's literally, I am an e-Estonian, you can say that. If you want to go and apply. And also, paperwork is not allowed in Estonia, by the way. There is no paperwork. No paperwork, okay? So with that, digital ID, right? So this is going to be to Yoda. So digital identity is absolutely a key for effective e-governance. It's obvious. So it's becoming a priority of low-income countries as well, because it really involves digital inclusion, maybe identification for development. They stated this: the widespread lack of ID in developing countries is a critical stumbling block to national growth. Digital ID combined with already extensive use of mobile devices in the developing world offers a transformative solution to the problem. So this is what the World Bank kind of concluded, how important it is to have a digital ID. Can you imagine each of you have a unique national ID or digital ID, and if you go to Kabale, you can have your process easily done. If you go to Maganania for renewal, they can pull your information by that single ID. If you go to your clinic, patient record can be pulled, that kind of stuff, right? If you, for bad guys, a police can easily identify those bad guys and buy that ID. So the opportunity is limitless. So I want Yoda to speak on that. So where are we as a nation in that initiative? So, and because that's a key enabler for digital governance. So where are we standing with that?
So one interesting policy direction, nothing to do with digital ID, but the Ethiopian Investment Commission recently is going to launch a new law. They call it a negative law. So what it does is, in the past, they say you can do A, you can do B, you can do C. Unless it's ABC, you cannot do anything else. So the negative law says, except this, this, and this, you can't do anything else. So that's a very conducive environment for tech and for innovation. That's also, I believe, the policy that Ministry of Innovation is taking towards transforming our digital economy. So yeah, with digital ID, as I said earlier on, with is important. Identity is not a card that I carry in my pocket. Instead, it's a means of proving who I say I am. When I transact over the internet, if I want to buy something online, the service provider needs to know who I am, basically. There's no transaction without identification. So identification is important in all service sectors. When I go to the bank, I get asked the Kabale ID. And there are levels of identification that a certain service provider needs to know. For example, the bank does not need to know my citizenship or ethnicity if I want to send money to you. Nowadays, with cryptocurrencies, of course, we don't need banks. We don't need middlemen. I can just pass money directly from me to you through an algorithm, right? But still, identification is very important in all sectors. Some countries have M-Pesa, for example. Identification is not, it's owned by the service provider, by the MNO, by M-Pesa. In some countries, there is national identification schemes. So every citizen has a unique ID, unique number. That's maybe, for example, the case of India, that number is associated with biometrics. So I'm given a 10-digit, 11-digit number, and I give my fingerprints, iris, and everything. So I get enrolled, then I get that unique number. So that unique number defines who I am wherever I go. After that, there is verification, there is authentication whenever I want to get a service. So there are 3 steps towards achieving this. So what the government is doing at the moment is Ministry of Innovation and Ministry of Peace are highly involved in this, in implementing a digital identity platform for Ethiopians. It's not focused on security, it's more of an economic tool, less of a political tool. It's not about tracking citizens or identifying my activities. It's about easing my life and making services easy.
I'm going to paint a little bit of a gloomy picture on this. And I'll start by saying, addressing what we call the scandal of invisibility. I think many of you probably have heard that of the 1.2 billion people worldwide who don't have ID, half of that is in Africa. Basically meaning half of the population in Africa. One minister in my country, I flew with her to my country and I was talking about this. And she realized that her own mother, she had just passed on and she was never registered. And she said that in the event that there was something we were to be accounted, I will never be linked to anyone because I will have no mother. That is the situation we're in Africa. And that means this digital ID becomes really paramount. But the question we want to be asking ourselves, what would be the basis for a good ID or digital ID? He just mentioned about some countries having some legal or some kind of national ID. Because most of the time when we're talking about digital ID, we're talking about a functional ID which allows you to access services. Going to the bank and get credit, no access to a digital ID. And I'm talking about, say, for instance, a child that is born today until the time that they get a digital ID. Because the digital ID, it only targets a certain age group. So it therefore means that we should also be thinking about coming up with what I would call a foundational ID. And that starts with the civil registration and vital statistics. And part of the work that Ethiopia is actually doing is to ensure that there is a proper recording around the civil registration and vital statistics, which will then generate what one would call a legal ID and translate into a digital ID. So a digital ID, I think for now, it's something paramount. It has to be implemented and make it inclusive. And for me, it has 3 or 4 perhaps things that we need to look at. One is the issue of inclusivity. I think the minister did allude to a many of our P. Who owns that chip which is in the ID? Because if, like the minister says, that if we don't own the process, someone else is going to own the data that's going to sit outside the continent. So that is part of the regulatory framework that the government has also has to look at. Then there's the issue of privacy itself. How do we guard against the issues that he talked about? My information that doesn't get to another person. Because that is what if we don't put the necessary infrastructure around having a proper digital ID. And the third element to me is this about security. Again, confidentiality, integrity issues come along with that. And of course, the minister talked about interoperability, that we want a system when you go to another region, you are able to be identified. You can actually tell that this is crossing over. And for us at the African Center for Statistics, rather at the Center for Digital ID at the ECA, one of the things we are trying to do is that how do we harmonize processes to the extent that within that digital ID or that legal ID, if I'm crossing from Ethiopia to Djibouti, they can actually say, oh, now Oliver has crossed. Because there's some little, this is a lot of work that needs to be done, as you were saying, that is not easy. But I think a country like Ethiopia, the steps have you can see visible progress that is being made towards achieving some of these activities. So really, I think that the issue of leadership that the minister talked about, the issue about commitment, the issue of mobilizing resources is key to ensuring that we have a proper infrastructure in place.
Awesome. Thank you, Oliver. Unless Dr. Kanza or Adosi Sai have something to add, we can go to the final kind of thoughts.
On the digital ID. First of all, the issue of uniquely identifying people, it's not an easy business to make it happen. So the benefit is very well known. Once you know each and every citizen, uniquely you can provide them personalized services. It's also very important to the economy, but there are different discussions. For me, for Ethiopia, it's a very good opportunity. Maybe we are doing this project lately, so we have a very good opportunity to learn from the others. The issues that I want to raise is there are different interests on this project. Some people, they look this project from the perspective of security. So how I'm going to have a system that can control crime or control illegal business and to provide identity for citizens and non-citizens. The other perspective is just to look this from the economical and the social aspect of it. How I'm going to this technology just to boost the economy, to stimulate the e-commerce and different types of services. This is always the discussion not only in Ethiopia, also in the other part of the world. But now we are in a good position. This project is already officially initiated by our Prime Minister. He wants this project to happen as early as possible. We're also learning from different countries and different international organizations to do it in a proper way, also to have a comprehensive solutions that can serve the national security as well as the social and economical benefit of the society. This is what I want to say.
Thank you so much. Just before that, just quick fact. I'm sorry. Go ahead. Oh yeah, that's why I want to give it to the floor. Yeah, yeah, absolutely. So quick fact about India, the biggest democracy in the world right now. It's a population of about 2 billion people that's just wrapped up effective electronic voting, right? So that's another thing that, if we start talking about that, we're going to need another half an hour. But just thinking about that, maybe I think there's also an ambition to do some of the election upcoming here in digital. So those are all the nuances and key aspects of this whole effort of digital governance. So let's talk about risks associated with this effort. I mean, some of it we discussed along our conversation, but I want to highlight some of them, and then what are the plans to mitigate, maybe from international experiences, the two gentlemen, including Mr. Singh, and also from the government side, is there any mitigation put in place? Are you already anticipating risk? If you're not, there's a problem. So there should be that mindset of that there's a risk. There's a potential issue associated with this. Once you realize that, I think that there can be a mitigation plan. So some of the things that we discussed, funding and laws and public policy and citizen reaction is another huge thing, right? And measuring impact, how are we going to measure that impact once we go digital? And organizational and individual culture and process and technology and cost, all these are some of the risks associated with this grand implementation on a national level. So what are the potential and possible mitigation plans elsewhere this has been done? Doctor, you were mentioning while we were having coffee that only 6 countries were kind of successful-ish in digital governance in Africa. So what are the experiences? And then I'll give it to you, the race panelists. Okay.
Okay, thank you. The earlier reference was with respect to e-governance. The countries in Africa that are considered to have a high e-know-how in terms of the groups of states that have high e-governance readiness is Ghana, Mauritius, Morocco, Seychelles, South Africa, and Tunisia. That's it. So we have a long way to go. Back to your last question around risks. As an organization, we have set up a new center to deal with cybersecurity. Technology, for all its benefits, is not net positive. The dark net has a lot of crime that's taking place, much more than we see. So we work a lot on external crime that we can see, but there's quite a bit that's happening in the digital space. Not everyone is on top of it. The global systems and protocols are not on top of it. We're collaborating with institutions like Interpol, as well as with governments and businesses, to see how to mitigate and manage the situation. You don't want to stifle innovation. At the same time, you don't want to overprotect anyone, otherwise that also stifles innovation. And equally, you need to be able to track crime globally. One of the big concerns is the level of vulnerability that Africa has with respect to financial crime. So cryptocurrency, great, but people are hacking banks, are hacking government systems, hacking phones, and stealing money. It's really calling for a new form of cooperation, and that's the process we're supporting and trying to see how to help everyone improve their systems, because it's quite expensive.
I want to go next. Everybody has a chance.
Yeah, a quick one. I think in addition to what she has said, and I'm not going to go that in terms, what she has alluded to, but I want to look at around e-commerce and talking about payments and the possible leakages if the system is not robust enough. We're talking about GDP, digital GDP contribution to, digital contribution to GDP. And right now, the estimated numbers are so huge that if it was well organized and tapped into, our GDP would go up to something like 15%, the contribution just from GDP. However, there is a possibility that if we don't put the necessary mechanism in place to curb some of the possible leakages, and I'll give you an example. If I want to purchase something in country X, or in fact maybe even to a colleague who is sitting in country X, I can just transfer funds straight to this person, and no one in where I am will be able to tell if the mechanism are not there to actually capture that transfer that I've made through my mobile transfer. But I guess maybe the technicians that are here maybe will correct me. But I get a sense that if some of those transfers, depending on the size, are not properly captured, it means that we also lose out in the GDP. And what it actually means that, like the minister said, that proper think-through is required in terms of the strategy, the regulatory framework, in terms of monitoring such transactions, that are going out without even seeing the good, because I'm paying for a good perhaps that is going to sit in the same country. All I've done is just transfer the money and nothing has come in. Because I've just paid for a service. And it is in that country where that service is, it's not registered on that side. And it's supposed to be part of contribution to the GDP. And how do we capture that? So those are some of the things I think that needs to be looked into very clearly as we develop these strategies in countries.
Okay. Next.
Okay. In this digital transformation endeavors, I believe we're facing some risks, maybe challenges. The first thing is the technology. We have to make sure technology selection has to foresee the futures, not the current situation. For example, the common understanding of infrastructure was just mainly focused on the connection of different devices. now the issue of infrastructure is becoming more connecting the ecosystem. It's not like connecting machines, it's connection the ecosystem. What does it mean when we say the ecosystem? The future is more of about the smart cities, the smart homes, any infrastructure in consideration with the existing understanding can already create a big problem in the future. So the infrastructure is now moving from the conventional infrastructure to more digital infrastructure. That digital infrastructure is infrastructure that connect the ecosystem. So when we say the infrastructure, it's not only broadband connectivity. We have to think about how we are connecting the telecom infrastructure or the communication infrastructure. It could be broadband. Also, how we are connecting with the data centers. Because of the Internet of Things and other big data generating resources, we are becoming in challenge on data. Now the world is poor in knowledge, but the data is already there. So all the computing powers, the high performance computing, the big data analytics and artificial intelligence can be designed together. It's not only just to have a wireless communication or a wired communication. So to be a digital ready, one thing that we have to think seriously is the integrated approach, connecting the ecosystem, not the device, connecting the ecosystem. Rushing to technology selection it creates a big problem. So this has to be one area of risk. Second one is the integration. The integration, the national and regional integration is very important. It's already, different visions already set by African Union, by United Nations. So we have to make sure to align all our national initiative has to align with the regional and the international initiatives. This is a good example of the national ID. The vision of the national ID is just to have the Africans, to have the movement of people in the Africa and to the world. This is the vision. People just to move from one continent to another continent without any difficulties. So the integration has to be very important. And the other one is especially, just I want to mention this in the context of Ethiopia, not leaving behind the private sector, especially in Ethiopia. This is a very special time just to make sure leaving the private sector behind, it creates big problem on the transformation agenda.
Thank you. In favor of, we're going to have to open it up for the floor, and then maybe some of the things you can address when the question is asked, okay? All right, so for the floor. All right, second person there. Yeah. Is Mike here? Or?
Thank you very much. Thank you for an engaging conversation as well. I'm quite heartened to hear some of the dialogue and the initiatives that are upcoming. On the digital governance question, obviously, as we transition to more e-governance and digital governance systems, a lot of data will be generated. How much, if any of it, are you thinking to make open, so that people actually get a chance to analyze the data, create new businesses, provide insights for government and service delivery? Secondly is, I think it is fantastic that we're talking about 1 GB connectivity to Warada level, but I think most of us have some experience where you walk into a government office and say, "System aysara, mabrat yellem," right? So infrastructure is not just, does it reach the last mile, but the power and the other options that, the pieces that build into, am I able to access this service, is a big question. So, and I'm glad that you, is there any discussion around how do we ensure that the most local government level have not only the internet connectivity and the services, but also power to make sure that services are being delivered properly.
Okay, thanks. My question was, or comment was, there was a mention of the negative law earlier, and it's an interesting concept. And when we move towards this area, I think it's worthwhile to consider what should be in that, negative law when these things are facilitated in terms of what is it that this huge amount of data that's going to be aggregated and connected not to be used for, or if used in certain ways, the processes and the counter checks that need to be available, and then everything else is okay. I think it's worth considering because even if it's not public institutions, I mean, already there's huge amounts of data that is already aggregated, and with it also comes tremendous amount of power that can be potentially abused by private companies too. So that is something I would like some reflections on in terms of what should be, if any negative laws that should be included when we do this. And I will connect it to my earlier comment about co-creation. It wasn't about munching NGO money, that my comment in the earlier panel, and doing nothing. But when you do these kind of things, because they are complex, because they are expensive, different stakeholders have to be onboarded or should reflect on it. And I think already most of the panelists have touched on these things moving to the right endpoint. So also in that space, perhaps it's a correction of the understanding of my earlier comment, but you can reflect on what parts also in terms of co-creation. Thank you.
Maybe one more? Maybe two.
Thank you. I think maybe, if I may sneak in a big comment here. I love the reference to sort of some of the ideal countries that we have, like Estonia. But perhaps what I would caution us against is in looking at, digital transformation only widens the gaps that we have, right? It doesn't bring it closer. So if we don't have existing policies that pull together all facets of the society, then we'll actually end up in a worse place than where we started. So that's number one. So when we look at Estonia, Estonia might leave behind a few thousand, but in our case, we'll leave behind 80 million. So we're not all swimming in the same lane. So I would say, let's look at similar and at par countries. So the example of Aadhaar from India is a fantastic one, because then we actually have similar countries and growth that we can actually refer to. And perhaps the last comment coming to Elsie's mention is around policy and policymakers. How do we educate our policymakers? And the conversation with the State Minister earlier is also, we talk about skilling, but skilling to drive the university graduates into the right jobs, right? So the 21st century skills, or placing and upskilling those that are already out of universities. But there's a huge element we need to think about around civil society and civil servants specifically, right? Because the enforcers on the other side are actually civil servants. Government, how do we enable government? How do we create a sort of an alpha team within government to really help lead and drive the changes as well on the other side? So that would be my very brief comment. Thank you.
We mustn't leave them behind. The question is, your policies in allowing the commercial sector, which could be running ahead of you, how fast are you changing your policy, or is it is it difficult? Because certain companies had to close 4 times and open 4 times because of the policy issue regarding tax or VAT. So how far is that? Is it a big attention you're giving so that commercialization can come forward?
Insightful remark, absolutely. Whenever we benchmark, actually I try to pivot to our similar economies, which kind of alluded. Estonia is a different beast, you're right? 2 million people, plus they started in 1997, and it's a different ball game. But yeah, absolutely, and that's why I mentioned this 80 million people. You are absolutely spot on that digital transformation, if it's not inclusive, that is going to be disastrous, actually, instead of being helpful. So the question was, actually, I tried to capture. Did you guys capture it too? Okay, yeah. From here was how much of the data, once we become digital, will be available for other sectors to tap into and then make a use of. And the other one is how can we optimize the service that we have right now. Actually, I had the same situation this morning, and my cousin went to Tele to get a dedicated line from me in the system አይሰራም ተብሎ ይሄው አሁንም በቴምፖራሪ ቁጥር ነው ያለሁት. So, and the other one was from here, can you elaborate a little bit on negative laws and how it can be implemented in the tech sector-ish? Okay, so in co-creation is, I think, mostly for public-private partnership instead of just give me the money and then, it goes down the pike. But how can we, and the last one is policy around commercialization, private sector, and how are we going to create this enabling environment? I think that is in the work, but if any more insight from the government side, I would be more than happy to hear as well. So we start from here. Let's make it very short. We have 20 minutes already. 7 minutes is gone, so make it fast and let's continue.
Okay, just the first question is about the availability of data to the private sector. This is okay.
You guys don't have to answer all of it, by the way. For effectiveness, just pick one, and then, for example, for you, the policy and that one, and some government-related ones, and then pick and choose, and so that we can address.
So what I want to respond on this is the willingness of the government is there, but the system is not there. Develop the platforms, just different government organization to release some statistical data, which is required for the private sector, for the student, or for the researchers. So what I want to say is it's a very good concern. It's also recognized by the government, but we are working on it. Power and infrastructure. So this is another problem. If no power, there is no connectivity. But it's good to understand that the government is trying to approach or tackle this problem in different ways. One is the issue that you raised, for example, off-grid solutions. Even you heard maybe 2-3 days before, there were different localities. It could be a university, it could be an industry. Even most of the industry park of Ethiopia now, they got around $1.8 billion fund from the China, just to make sure. So we can also, we are in our plan just to consider all these critical infrastructures that we're planning to install in the coming months to have a redundant power. For example, if we have a critical data center, to have a wireless and also fiber connectivity, also power. So the problem is there. Just it's the good thing is we also learning and trying to fix this problem in the coming project. Awareness is very important. We have a very big initiative, digital literacy program. Our government, our ministry is already identified as one of very critical program just to make sure all the citizens at locality level just to get an awareness program on digitization agenda. It's also on the basic skills to use technologies. But of course, this is a start. We need a lot of help from different partners to progress on this. How your policy, I think most of you may be observing how the policy, how issues are, how things are changing in this country. The government's 100% willing just to avoid all the barriers. If your madam, if you have a specific question, I can answer, but what I'm telling you, the government is ready to clear all the barriers for the business.
Thank you. maybe more around co-creation, PPP.
Yes,
and-
and
yeah,
ethics.
thank you.
Very good question. The role of ethics is becoming increasingly paramount at the solution from an ethical perspective. It's quite broad. Recently on Twitter there was a lot of noise raising awareness about the hand dryer that only recognizes white skin. Not, yes. It doesn't dispense. Or is it the soap dispenser? It only dispenses based on one color. And you someone took a napkin which was white and placed it and it dispensed. So we need to embed in the design of technology, yes, a broader perspective. It cannot just be a single lens. Simple technology, women with heels always suffer because it's mainly men who design the floor panels. So when they have spaces, the tech, it's small things. Or I had a friend who, when she was pregnant, they happened to have a sports car. She could not drive because it was never designed for somebody with a stomach that big. So, so things like this call and underscore your point about co-creation. That even in the design phase and throughout product development, solution development, as well as implementation of technology and the policies that underpin that, we need to have many actors involved. In the context of Africa, where we have, over 1,000 languages, cultures, it's even more important. We're very heterogeneous, and therefore there are quite a few different elements that need to be taken into account. Specifically, what we're trying to do as the World Economic Forum is we started a center for the Fourth Industrial Revolution that's based in San Francisco. And the role really is to support alongside the private sector, big businesses, small ones, academia, and it's not enough for it to be in San Francisco because jurisdictions vary. And so we've been encouraging other countries to participate. This year we expect to launch an affiliate center in Ethiopia. So we need different countries to be on board so that we have much more diversity in terms of thinking about the challenges, where abuse could come from, but equally how we can move forward together. And he's given me some good news that Ethiopia will keep up. Yes, thank you, sir.
Thank you so much. Oliver?
Very short, very short. And thank you for raising that question. Really, the situation doesn't just pertain to Ethiopia, but many of our African countries. To me, the way I look at it is that we need to look at the basics. And here the basics is that, can we define what we mean by investor education? How does it relate to the ministries that are responsible for ICT? Bring the Ministry of Education to revise the curriculum so that people can actually be trained from the first. But how much can we